Welcome to Inside the Chamber. I'm Nikki Anderson, the President and CEO of the Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce. On today's show, we'll be discussing the psychology of branding. Whether it's color, fonts, or design, companies want your business. They know the secrets to creating brands that attract you. Today's guests will provide a little more insight into the power of branding.
Inside the Chamber is brought to you by presenting sponsor, Naperville Bank and Trust.
So today's conversation is I feel is one that I'm very excited about since we just went through a brand and rebranding process at the Chamber. But we'll talk about that later. What I'd like to start off with, and Robin, I'd like to start off with you. Tell me a little bit about the psychology of branding.
When I think about the psychology of branding, I really liked, back in 2014, Forbes magazine put out an article, and they talked about it in this very basic way. I talk about, it's going back to old school. They talked about Maslow's hierarchy of need, and they talked about Aristotle's 7 causes of human action. And I think it's just a great way to conceptually to start to think about branding and thinking about consumer education about how people spend. And, you know, there's a lot of documentation and research talks about the emotions, and there is a lot of emotion that experienced in branding and having that as a connection. And if you look at an fMRI, it definitely shows when an individual is perceiving and evaluating a brand, we see very active in the emotional versus the informational area where they're looking at the product in terms of what it provides or the services, but that emotional area is definitely higher engaged in that process.
Awesome. Interesting. So I know that when I think of Apple, that's kind of cool, right? People want to identify with that. People want, right, it's got a cool factor. So when we think of different brands, and by the way, branding has a myriad of intricacies that go into it. It's not just a brand. But when you think about certain brands, and I want to be a part of it because it's cool, it's hip, it's important, are there certain brands or certain things about branding that people that attract people? So I'm going to look to you, Paul, and say, you know, Apple is a great example. I want to be a part of that. I want to have an iPhone. I want to have an iPad because that identifies me as someone that's maybe in the know. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, when you talk about Maslow's theory or the psychology of branding, once you understand the triggers of the mind and the influences that have that, you can begin to address them and manipulate them, and not manipulate them in a false way, but in an authentic way. So Apple, why do we want to become part of that brand? It's part of their ecosystem, right? You want to become part of it because they think different. They're the us versus them mentality, right? When we gravitate towards belonging, whether it's groups or whatnot, you can do that through, at a very basic level, through loyalty programs, but also at a very deep level, that us versus them mentality, all of a sudden, all right, you got that sort of a rah-rah kind of a thing going on.
Right. So you hit a word, loyalty. So I think of now Right Size, because I know when I look at what you guys created for our office environment, top of mind will always be Right Size. So
that's the idea.
Then I guess that's my question.
Right?
Yeah.
Every time you see that chair, every time you see that desk or cubicle, you say, "How did we get here?" That's the idea behind ongoing customer loyalty, is to have them think when they see whether it's imagery or color or an actual product, I'm with them.
Awesome. So when you think furniture, you don't think about branding, but obviously there is a psychology behind how you design a room and what it looks like and how people feel when they walk in. Has it changed over time? I know you've been
definitely.
around in this.
We 20 years now and watched the office environments evolve, and there's both internal and external branding in the whole workplace environment, because and we go through and ask these questions during our programming exercises. What do you want your customers to think of you when you walk in, when they walk in? What do you want recruits to think of your organization? How do you want your current staff to perceive the company and where it's going? Folks, when designing an office environment, have to take a lot of factors into play. Yeah. We've had folks who have said, we don't want to be perceived as being making too much money. Let's make the place look very simple. We want folks. We have folks who want to be perceived as cutting edge and cool, and want to make their place as close to a quote-unquote Google-like environment as possible. So perception is both internal and external.
That's so interesting, because I know I feel it since we've made that change, and so it's very true. So Robin, what I'd like to ask you is that whole idea of belonging. Why does that matter to people?
You know, it's really interesting. There is a consumer psychologist. Her name is Tiffany White, and she's done a TED Talk and talks about research, and I think it's so cool. It's out on YouTube. And the research was about self-brand connection and how we can start to connect and identify ourselves within a brand. And the research really indicated that when they set up where they had a brand and they started to provide negative information about the brand, what we started to see was individuals were now reporting a higher increase of depression, a higher increase of negative mood. So we see these things fused together. So the success of the brand and that self-concept is together. You think about third graders, you ask them to put a collage together of, my identity. They start throwing brands in there. They start throwing logos in there, right? And they really get very connected. I think the scary part, though, is that we see females really start to do this more and more as they age. And if we think about the research, oh my, we've got a product or a brand that's really starting to tank. What could that possibly do? But I think it's really interesting how we start to fuse and we get that, that self-brand connection and fuse those together.
I think Harley Davidson is probably one of the greatest examples of that. It's not a motorcycle. It's freedom for men. It's leather. It's I'm a badass. It has nothing to do with the actual motor and the bike.
Yeah,
it's a lot to do with the image of being, I ride a Harley. Yeah. And it's one of the strongest brands that's out there.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and I think we've been reading a little bit about Sears. 50 years ago, that was the it brand of the catalog and everything. They did it so well. They have no brand really, and that is my guess because I'm not an expert. You guys are. But is that part of what causes a company's demise, that it could be that there is no brand, there is no connection? That I even think about consistency in branding, and maybe that loyalty starts to fall off?
Well, I think that Sears note also has to do with, it comes down to with brand who you associate yourself with. Sears made a very strong decision and went out and acquired Kmart. The question has to be asked, did the acquisition of Kmart bring the Sears brand down to a level below that it used to be?
Interesting.
If Sears had done a deal with an Amazon or new age, cutting edge e-commerce company, would have elevated the brand in the eyes of people, that Sears was on top of it. But with the acquisition of Kmart, one might think that they brought themselves down a couple levels.
Sure. Innovation and relevance is a big part of brand and answering to your consumer and keeping up with them and constantly innovating. And so was that a misstep or not? This is something to be debated.
So,
I think the consistency, what both of you talked about, because if we experience consistency, we experience safety and security. And if I feel safe and secure in this experience, I'm going to be devoted. I'm going to be loyal. I'm going to continue to revisit. I'm going to continue to purchase that product.
I completely agree. When you guys were talking about relevance and innovation, that's really something that the Chamber, when I came in, was really struggling with. Are we relevant? Are we innovative? And I think when I look at what both of you have done for our organization, I kind of feel like that hip person. I feel like we have a cool organization. And I think you said, Mason, that perception
determines reality, and reality determines decisions. And it's often it's the perception, whether it's what's really the truth or not, that has a greater impact, perception as opposed to true facts.
So when I look at the work that you both have done with our chamber, because relevancy and innovative, the perception of that was really important to our chamber. So I'll start with you, Paul, with our brand that you have done. What were some of the thoughts that went in? I know you've been involved in the chamber for a while, so.
I was involved in a chamber for a while, and that was not a good thing. We couldn't come in with any preconceived notions, right? So we really had to do an extensive listening tour, and we had to find out what was in the minds of the partners, the members, the constituents. So learning that and learning what makes them tick and learning what their expectations were and getting inside their minds a little bit, especially the newer generations. Innovation, cutting edge, and technology were at the forefront of that. In fact, some of the questions we asked them were more metaphorical. It's like, what would you, if you were at a dinner party, what would that dinner party look like, right? We really wanted to get into the psychology of what their expectations were, and we answered that. And I was involved more in the visual aspect of it. So when you, like you said, walk into the chamber offices now, and it's like a breath of fresh air. There's new life breathed into the brand, and the brand essence is bold thinking. And when you think of bold thinking, you think of bright colors, and you think of light and airy space, and everything from the collateral, the business cards, the visuals, the soon-to-be website, and even the environment and the experience itself is that bold thinking, make no mistake, this is who we are.
Awesome. So Mason, when your company, Right Size, comes into an organization, obviously furniture's come a long way. I look at what we had prior, it was awful. And what you've created for that.
You perceive it to be awful.
I perceived it to be awful,
Someone somewhere thought it was great when they put it in.
Yes, 20 years ago. So do you assess the company, or do you just have a clear sense of this is the direction that organizations are going to be productive to be able to make better decisions, or is it more of a science?
No, we have to identify a number of different factors. It is where they are today, where they're going, who they want to be, who they don't want to be, who they don't want to be thought of anymore. We take a lot of different factors into play, but then we're also taking industry best practices and what we know. And we touch about 350 different office spaces a month. So we've got a lot of experience, and we know what tends to work best. So with one ear, we're listening and identifying what is it and who do they want to be. And on the other side, we're leading them down a path, whether they kind of know it or not, to get them to that point, but also not affecting functionality along the way.
Interesting. And we're going to be back shortly, but Robin, when we come back, I want to talk to you about the psychology of walking into a space or seeing something, and maybe how that affects the brain, and then maybe buying power as well. So we'll be right back.
Naperville Bank and Trust has the expertise, knowledge, and experience to help you reach your business goals.
We would prefer to work with somebody like Naperville Bank and Trust. They're engaged in the community, they're able to help meet our financial needs, they understand us as a business.
They provide all the tools that you would ask that we as a growing business need of a bank. Most importantly, to me, it's a great personal relationship we have with Tom and John and our bankers.
It was the best thing we could have done in banking. And banking can be very cold. What the bank brings to us is that warm feeling when you come into the bank and people say, "Hi, Greg."
It's about being part of the community again, about being a name again, about having credit for who your business is instead of just being a number.
Naperville Bank and Trust. Bring it home.
Shop downtown and experience the vibrant, bustling center of Naperville. Over 100 shops, from longtime favorites to wonderful new additions. And after shopping, grab a bite to eat. With over 40 restaurants and places to enjoy a sweet treat too, there's something delicious for everyone. Day or night, come explore everything downtown Naperville has to offer.
So Robin, I'd like to start with you and talk about, again, the psychology when someone walks into maybe, and I think about our office just because it's new and I'm so excited about it, but I know when I walk in there immediately, I feel excited to be there. How does that, I think of stores, when you walk into a store and you maybe want to spend money. So is there a psychology to the idea of a brand or the feel of a company and buying power?
Absolutely. It's all about connecting on that emotional level and getting people to experience it. And I like the why, but I also like to think about the how of consumers are out there and what they're doing to spend and how they're going about doing that. And part of that is, we talked about that loyalty component and that's bringing up those past histories and connecting how we feel about things, and if we can experience it. I was just texting, honestly, this morning with my uncle from Michigan about Mountain Dew. And we talked about, have you had the old Mountain Dew that still has real sugar in it? And how was it the glass? Was it the taste? What was it that instantly brought me? And I was so excited because it reminded me of my childhood. And it was a very emotional experience. And I think that is really it, is tapping into that emotion, tapping into our memories and bringing that back up. And then we get very connected and we feel very fused to that. And then they have us. That's absolutely, we keep coming back.
I completely agree.
We keep coming back.
I think of the emotion when I feel when I go to work or when I, hand out that business card and I'm like a 10-year-old so proud of my project, it's like great. But what are some of the components that go into a successful brand?
Well, brands are experienced three ways, right? So verbally, visually, and experientially. And I love what you said about the stories, because stories are so powerful. It just gives people a way to connect to the brand. And you have your expectations and you have the experience itself, and then you have the stories and the memories, and that just feeds into somebody else's expectations. So it's a very powerful way to connect that story to that brand experience.
So from a visual perspective, because that's such a big part of what you do, what are some of the things that your company thinks about? I know you guys recently rebranded, Right Size rebranded. So what were some of the things that you thought about as you pulled together this new brand and this new message that you were sending out to your customers?
Yeah, we've got a very defined go-to-market strategy with what we consider to be message, audience, timing, and volume. And we really looked at the imagery of both our logo and our materials, our color palettes. Because we're in the interiors world, we're very strong and knowledgeable about color theory. And if you look at some of the greater organizations out there, the Home Depot, the Amazons, and the use of the color orange, it's the psychological sign of growth. Right Size, when it was incorporated back in 2004, had a very black, blue, and gray type of logo, which is more of a downer type of color. We rebranded to orange 3 years ago, and then in our rebrand of the whole image and messaging, we chose to stay with the orange color and then completely readapt the logo to be something more modern and cool. And I could go on for an hour about the 8 different meanings behind our logo, but it's visual to the public, 2 meanings behind our logo. The rest of them are internal, and we rebranded as much for our internal folks as we did for the external public.
And that is such a great point. Branding is not just to say to your potential customer, hey, we're here, we're hip, we're cool, we want you to be our customer, but I think about the value of my staff, not only investing in the future of our organization by changing its look and its feel and messaging, but I look at the change that it's had on my staff. So,
absolutely, and there you're talking about engagement, and really, now I feel like they're investing in me, that I'm going to be better because look what they're giving me. I think about that. So breathing and learning how to breathe is essential in being able to perform. So when I'm working with athletes or anyone that's trying to perform at an elite level, we often talk about breathing and being able to enhance your breathing technique, because it's all about being mindful. It's about creating the ability to concentrate and focus. So now who has an app on their phone, on their watch, that reminds us to breathe? They have now branded Hope. I'm going to be better. And I think that's what you're talking about when you're branding for the internal. You're really creating that connection for your employees, and now they feel like there's hope. There's, we have a cause now, and we're moving towards that. And I think that's where millennials, and that's where we're really headed towards, is branding in that way.
Yeah,
I love that, a cause too. So why not create brand ambassadors out of staff, out of employees? Right.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's absolutely vital. And we might have had a couple people go, "Oh, wait, we're going to lose these cubicles," because our cubicles were, to me, 8 foot high perception. And now, I see my staff. I can walk in and I can see everybody, which sometimes it was 5 o'clock and Lauren would come, "Hey, Nikki, I haven't seen you all day." And it was a really bad feeling. And, we'll walk in and we touch the furniture. I love this. So I can see a change in my staff in just wanting to be there. But is there any kind of statistics that shows improvement in performance from staff or longevity with a company that might invest in that? Or
I think you can look at it that, first off, not everyone is going to be a fan of any rebrand or actual brand. You're always going to have a group that is either resistant to change or really is going to embrace it. So if you really look at it, you probably have a standard bell curve. You've got a small group of people who are just ecstatic, a small group who aren't very happy with it, and most of them who are just in the middle and they like it.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to does it affect productivity, I think that it gives an initial jolt of energy into change. And it's what occurs after the initial honeymoon as to whether that engagement remains consistent and the energy remains there. So as with anything, when the rocket boosters go down, it gets that up in the air. But to keep it up in orbit, that's really where the management and the true values of the organization are going to show through. Is you can use imagery to change perception, but reality will always show itself.
So then it's on my shoulders, right, to make
very quickly thereafter.
It's also important to make sure the brand is authentic, right? Not just individuals, but also in the strategy behind it. And if it's authentic and management follows through that, it's easier to keep that going.
Right. Can you think of any obvious branding mistakes that you've seen recently out there, companies that have either tried to rebrand and it's been a disaster? I know one that I think of. Or companies that just they don't get it.
Right now, and maybe people will think I'm crazy when I say this, but I believe the pink right now, people are getting confused. As soon as we see pink for not-for-profits, breasts, right? But we don't know, is it Susan G. Komen? Is it Avon 39? Is it breastawareness.org? And we're starting to see a confusion. I gave to somebody, it was something pink, and I don't know. So have we saturated that? And I think sometimes not-for-profits everyone will attach to a color, which I get that there's an identity, but I think there's also a saturation, and maybe their individual organization gets lost in that. And I just think that was instantly came to my mind, was thinking about the saturation of pink, and I don't know if I've given to Susan G. Komen or the Avon 39. I can't remember. I just gave to somebody for pink, and I know that's what it is. So it was interesting to feel with that one.
Interesting.
Solution. Well, I'm in a branding company, so I look at the failures of branding, all the time. And so Gap is one, right, where they had a very iconic blue square, and then they decided to separate the words and put the blue in between and add a gradient, and it was just a colossal fail. Kraft, very iconic brand, and he decided to flower it up a little bit, and consumers revolted. We're not going to buy your products if you keep using this brand. So they had to retract their brand and go back to our beloved own Chicago CNA insurance company, who spent millions on adding a ball to their logo. And after a year, they said, we don't need the ball. So they went back to their original logo. Netflix, on their DVD mailing service, decided to call it Quickster. Well, nobody knew who Quickster was, and it was brand confusion and dilution, so they quickly got rid of the word Quickster and said, no, we'll just keep everything Netflix to keep the brand strong.
Interesting. I think of Coke Zero,
yeah.
Right? Remember that was like, talk of, hashtag fail. That just was an absolute disaster. And I think about the money and the time that goes into something like that, only to find out. So how does that happen? I mean, if you're not reaching out to your customer, your constituents to say, hey, like you guys did with a listening tour, are they just surmising that this is what their customer wants, or are they just getting bad information?
Crowdsource information, but it comes down to what crowd did you get it from? Who's genuinely making the decisions? I've seen scenarios in office space that we completely disagreed with how it should be laid out, but the CEO is going to strong arm it, and he's going to do it his way, and we smile and we do it his way. Some have worked, some we've seen colossal fails. So it really comes down to who's genuinely making the decision. Is it one person's opinion? Is it the right group? There is no, for us, truly one silver bullet to design a workplace environment that's going to be productive and collaborative, and everyone's going to be ecstatic to come there every day. And I don't think there's one silver bullet to design a logo, pick the colors or the imagery. You need to be flexible and nimble with it, and to quickly identify if it is not working, dump and run, or retract.
Right. Do over. So when we talk about branding, and you had mentioned earlier about the importance of it being authentic, certainly there are companies there that want to change the brand and have this look, but if there's not, that authenticity behind it, it doesn't matter how good your brand is. So have you seen that, and what's the outcome of that if people aren't genuinely living the brand? I don't know if that's
Sure. Well, some of the examples I gave before, I think, were company executives probably saying it's time for a refreshed look or look and feel, but there was nothing to purport that, or nothing behind that in terms of, am I really listening to our consumers? Am I backing it up with strategy? And changing the visuals without a purpose behind it, I think, is destined to fail.
So before we wrap up, I'd just like to get some final thoughts about branding and about today's discussion, because it's been fascinating. I know I've learned some things. Mason, any closing thoughts on branding and the importance of it for the success of a company, which you guys obviously experience?
Strategy is very important, and the follow-through is very important. I will endorse, we utilize a neurological marketing approach that's based on an individual out of California. You can check out salesbrain.com. It is a very interesting, very educational way to learn about how you can get down into people's brain and affect how they think about you. So I think that it requires some real deep looking into who you are and who you want to be, and ensuring that your values connect with that brand.
Awesome. Back to the authenticity. Robin?
I'm just so excited about, I think, where we're going when we talk about branding and selling a cause. And I think where our millennials are and where we're going to be moving makes me really excited. And that we're seeing now statistics out there that show that brands that affect humanity, they are actually showing better performance on the stock market. So it means that we are going to continue, if we're giving back to our community and doing what we need to do in our community, and we're promoting that, then the companies themselves are going to be performing better. And it's just going to be a cycle that growth is going to be pretty amazing to watch. Awesome. And so that makes me excited.
That's great. Paul?
Well, in the realm of psychology of branding, I think of one of the most powerful examples for me is the Coke Pepsi challenge back in, I think, the late 70s or early 80s, where blindfolded, people liked the taste, most people liked the taste of Pepsi more than Coke. But when they took the blindfolds off of those same people, they liked the Coke better than the Pepsi. So why is that? If they truly liked it in the blind test, what was it about it when they saw the Coke can? Well, memories had a lot of play in the story of Coke and the history. And so from a psychology standpoint, there's something to be said about how that affects the mind and the triggers, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Then once you know those, what can we do about that?
Yeah. This has been a fascinating conversation. I think we could probably go on. But I thank you all so much for being here and sharing your thoughts and expertise on branding.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. For joining us today. I hope you found value in today's program. The Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce is committed to supporting a strong business climate. So next time you think about dining, shopping, or hiring a service, think Chamber. See you next time.